New Zealand was once hailed as a rock star economy, the envy of the developed world. Today, its GDP per capita has plunged by 4%, tens of thousands are leaving, and an $18 billion dairy industry leans dangerously on China's fortunes. If paradise looks this fragile, was the dream ever real, and what seismic flaw turned boom into breakdown? The answer rewrites everything you thought you knew about New Zealand's success. In the years after the global financial crisis, New Zealand became the poster child for economic success. International headlines called it a rock star economy, with steady growth and a reputation for resilience that drew investors and dreamers alike. But the numbers tell a different story now. GDP per capita has fallen by nearly 4% since mid-2023, the sharpest drop the country has seen since the recession of 1991. Unemployment has jumped from just over 3% to more than 5%, and the number of people out of work now tops 150,000, a figure not seen in over a decade. Construction, once a major engine of growth, has slumped by almost 10% in a single year. In Auckland, rough sleeping has nearly doubled, and business closures are rising at a pace that rattles even seasoned observers. The world's image of New Zealand as a stable, prosperous paradise has begun to crack. Breathtaking scenery and political calm did little to protect ordinary families from the fallout. The reality for many is a daily struggle with rising costs, stagnant wages, and a sense that the promise of opportunity has faded. Economist Shamubeel Eaqub, one of the country's most outspoken analysts, puts it bluntly, "We have built an economy on property speculation, not production." His words echo in empty storefronts and crowded welfare offices as the country faces the kind of economic doubt it has not felt in a generation. The question is no longer whether the downturn is real, but how deep the problems go. Behind the headlines and government reassurances, a more troubling pattern has taken hold, one that raises doubts about whether the prosperity of the past decade was ever as solid as it seemed. The stage is set for a closer look at the structural weaknesses that have been quietly growing beneath New Zealand's surface, waiting for the right moment to break through. At the heart of New Zealand's economy stands a single, towering pillar: dairy. Every year, this sector generates around 18 billion New Zealand dollars, accounting for a quarter of all goods exports. But the real story lies in where that milk ends up. More than a quarter of New Zealand's dairy exports, roughly 26%, are shipped to China. That means the fortunes of thousands of rural families and the stability of entire regions hinge on the demand and policies of one foreign market. On a typical morning in Canterbury, a dairy farmer checks the latest trade news before heading out to the sheds. He knows that a sudden shift in Chinese regulation or a drop in demand could cut his income overnight. It is a reality that keeps many in the sector on edge, despite high global milk prices and record productivity per cow. Fonterra, the country's dominant dairy cooperative, has warned about this concentration risk in board meetings and annual reports. Yet the company, under pressure from shareholders and the lure of higher margins, has continued to double down on China, where buyers pay top dollar for milk powder, infant formula, and specialty butters. This narrow focus is not limited to dairy. Meat exports, mainly beef and lamb, bring in another $8.4 billion each year, and forestry adds $5 billion more, mostly from raw logs shipped out for processing elsewhere. Combined, these three sectors make up 60% of all goods exports. The country's economic engine runs on a handful of primary products, leaving it exposed to global price swings, trade disputes, and the shifting priorities of foreign governments. The risks are not theoretical. When China tightened import rules in 2021, dairy prices dropped and farm incomes withered in parts of Waikato and Southland. Fonterra's own forecasts show that even a modest slowdown in Chinese demand could erase billions from national GDP and put thousands of rural jobs at risk. For many farmers, the question is not if a shock will come, but when. The system's efficiency has become its greatest vulnerability, tying New Zealand's prosperity to forces far beyond its control. New Zealand's economic engine runs on a simple formula: export what you have, buy what you need. For decades, this meant shipping out milk, meat, and logs with minimal processing, while importing everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals. The country's Economic Complexity Index now ranks just 50th in the world, far behind other developed nations. High-tech goods make up only 13% of manufactured exports. The rest is mostly raw or barely processed material, a strategy that leaves most of the real profit overseas. Tech entrepreneur stories echo this reality. One founder, after struggling for years to raise capital for a software startup in Wellington, finally moved his team to Sydney. He describes the experience as frustrating but inevitable. "If you want to scale, you have to leave," he says. The numbers back him up. New Zealand invests just 1.4% of GDP in research and development. Across the OECD, the average is nearly double that. The result is a thin pipeline of new ideas, few high-value industries, and a startup scene that rarely breaks out beyond the country's borders. Goldore is how Ganesh Nana, chair of the New Zealand Productivity Commission, sums up the challenge. "We've been selling gold ore, not gold," he says. "We let others do the refining, the branding, the value-adding, and then we buy it back at a premium. It is a pattern that locks in low wages and slow growth. Over the past decade, labor productivity has inched up by just 0.3% per year. Meanwhile, the OECD average is 5 times higher. This lack of complexity leaves the country exposed on all sides. When global demand for commodities dips, there is little else to fall back on. When climate change or new trade barriers hit agriculture, the pain spreads quickly. The promise of a high-wage, innovative future remains out of reach, so long as the bulk of capital and national attention flows into real estate rather than new ideas. The cost is measured not just in lost exports, but in the slow erosion of opportunity for the next generation. For many New Zealanders, the road to wealth has been paved with bricks and mortar. Real estate now accounts for 11% of the country's GDP, with another 5 to 6% coming from construction. Over the past decade, house prices have soared by 130%, far outpacing wage growth and leaving the median home at 8.8 times the median household income. That is nearly triple the OECD affordability benchmark. For those who bought early, the gains have been extraordinary. Older homeowners like Margaret in Hamilton watch their property values climb even as their neighborhoods empty out. She describes her house as her retirement fund and safety net, a sentiment echoed by millions across the country. But for younger generations, the story is very different. First home buyers face a market where even modest houses are out of reach without help from parents or years of saving. Rents have risen alongside prices, and the dream of home ownership now feels more like a distant hope than a realistic goal. The divide is growing sharper. Young professionals, teachers, and nurses talk about leaving not just their towns, but the country itself, searching for places where a decent home is still within reach. The capital locked in property is not just a personal matter, it is a national one. Every dollar poured into housing is a dollar not invested in new businesses, research, or export industries. Sean Hendy, a leading innovation advocate, points out that New Zealand's obsession with property speculation has come at the cost of lost talent and missed opportunities. "We're investing in houses, not ideas," he says, and that's why so many of our brightest leave. This pattern has created a dangerous illusion of wealth. Rising property values make homeowners feel richer, but the underlying economy grows more fragile. As more capital flows into bricks and land, less is available for the sectors that drive productivity and future prosperity. The generational gap widens, with older Kiwis sitting on windfalls while the young take on crushing debt or give up on owning altogether. Meanwhile, the system grows more exposed to shocks. With so much of the nation's wealth tied up in housing, any downturn in the market threatens not just individual fortunes, but the stability of the entire economy. The next challenge is already looming: a wave of mortgage resets that could double repayments for hundreds of thousands of households, putting even more pressure on families and the broader financial system. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand took an extraordinary stance in late 2023. Faced with runaway inflation and a property market that refused to cool, officials made their intent clear. A recession was no longer something to avoid, but a necessary tool to restore balance. In public statements, the bank's leadership described their aim as engineering a slowdown, raising the official cash rate to levels not seen in over a decade. Mortgage rates quickly climbed past 6%, and consumer spending fell away. The policy shift sent a chill through the business community. Brad Olson, chief economist at Infometrics, called it a turning point, arguing that deliberately inducing a recession is a blunt instrument, but it's the path we've chosen. The effects rippled outward. Regional investment projects stalled, and public sector job cuts began to mount. By mid-2024, the economy was shrinking quarter after quarter, and the pain was spreading from boardrooms to main streets. In December 2024, a new shock arrived. Statistics New Zealand revised its GDP data, revealing that the downturn was deeper than anyone had realized. Growth in 2023 had been overstated, and the contraction in 2024 was sharper than first reported. The revision was blamed on staff shortages and a rushed software upgrade, but the damage to confidence was immediate. Businesses and households alike were left questioning the reliability of the numbers they had been relying on to make decisions. For many, it felt like the ground was shifting beneath their feet, with no clear sense of where the bottom might be. A young couple in South Auckland, both working full-time, signed their first mortgage in 2021. The rate was 2.6%, manageable even with a newborn. Like 40% of New Zealand homeowners, they locked in during the era of ultra-cheap money, convinced that record-low rates would last. Now their fixed term is up. The new rate is 6.1%. Their monthly payment jumps from $2,950 to $5,150. Groceries, childcare, and petrol have all become more expensive, but the mortgage is now swallowing half their combined income. The family's story is echoed in thousands of households across the country. Bank data shows that nearly half of all home loans are resetting at rates double what borrowers expected just a few years ago. For many, the numbers simply do not add up. Savings shrink, credit card balances grow, and every dollar is counted. Some families cut back on food and health care. Others quietly list their homes, hoping to sell before falling behind. Real estate agents in Auckland and Wellington report a surge in must-sell listings, especially from first-time buyers and young families. The forced sales ripple through the market, pushing prices down and eroding the paper wealth that once made homeowners feel secure. For those who stretched to buy at the peak, the dream of stability now feels like a trap. The pressure is relentless and the sense of betrayal is real. In online forums and exit interviews, more and more families talk openly about leaving, packing up, selling at a loss, and starting over in Australia or further afield. The mortgage reset is not just a budgeting challenge, it is a breaking point, turning the housing obsession of the past decade into a wave of personal and national crisis. More than 130,000 New Zealanders packed their bags and left the country in 2024, a record-breaking wave of departures not seen in modern times. The net loss tells the real story. Nearly 48,000 citizens gone in a single year, including thousands of skilled workers, engineers, teachers, and healthcare professionals. For many, the decision was driven by numbers as much as frustration. Across the Tasman, average wages are 26% higher, and in some fields, the gap stretches even wider. Families who once hoped for a future in Auckland or Wellington now send resumes to Sydney, Brisbane, or Perth. The pull of higher salaries and better career prospects is matched by the push of rising costs and stagnant opportunities at home. Young professionals, once the backbone of New Zealand's workforce, are leaving in groups, sometimes entire households, sometimes whole teams from a single company. The loss is more than just headcount. Each departure chips away at the country's capacity to innovate, to staff hospitals, to teach the next generation. The country's brain drain is no longer a slow leak, but a torrent, draining skills and energy that New Zealand can scarcely afford to lose. In a country long defined by its youthful spirit, the demographic tide is turning. Today, nearly 1 in 5 New Zealanders is over the age of 65. That share is set to rise to 1 in 5 by 2034, as the share of elderly climbs from 18 to 21%. Demographer Paul Spoonley describes this as a quiet revolution, one that will reshape everything from public finances to the fabric of daily life. The consequences reach far beyond pension payments. As the population ages and birth rates remain low, the ratio of working-age citizens to retirees shrinks. Each taxpayer must shoulder a greater share of the cost for health care, superannuation, and social support. The pressure does not stop with welfare. New Zealand faces a staggering infrastructure gap, estimated between $200 and $400 billion. Decades of underinvestment have left roads, water systems, hospitals, and schools struggling to keep up with demand. An older population means more hospital beds, more accessible transport, and greater strain on public services, yet the funds to build and maintain these assets are harder to find as the tax base narrows. Spoonley warns that every year of delay compounds the cost, passing an ever larger bill to the next generation. The dream of a well-supported, equitable society is colliding with the hard reality of demographic and fiscal limits, raising urgent questions about who will pay for tomorrow's New Zealand. Today, more New Zealanders leave than ever before, while the nation's future hinges on choices made in real time. As the population ages and innovation trails, the cost of inaction grows heavier with each year. The world is watching how a country famed for reinvention responds to crisis. The next chapter is not written. Its authors are here now, deciding what endures and what fades.